Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are ready to start Parshat Vayeitzei. Numerous lessons to learn from this parsha as Yaakov Avinu makes his way away from Eretz Yisrael. And we actually start. We start with the very, very beginning, where we notice that this entire parsha, the Sfat Emes points out, there is no breaks. You don't have the regular Parshat Stuma, Parshat Ptucha. It's just a story that essentially goes all the way through. Why is that the case in Parshat Vayeitzei? Says the Sfat Emet, V'nira lomar ki ramza haTorah b'zeh. What is the Torah hinting to? Shelo zaza lachutz ad shuvo eleha la'aretz machshavato shel Yaakov Avinu me'eretz Yisrael. From the moment Yaakov Avinu leaves Eretz Yisrael until he comes back, which he starts doing at the end of this week's parsha, his mind never left Eretz Yisrael. He was thinking about it the entire time. He wasn't going to forget about Eretz Yisrael. Yes, he had to go to run away, to get away from Esav. Yes, he had to go find a wife, but leaving Eretz Yisrael, it was one continuous thought all the way through that he had, recognizing that he needs to get back to Eretz Yisrael. He spent years outside of Israel, but his mind was always thinking about Israel, and that's why throughout the entire parsha, we don't have the usual breaks between the stories and the sections as we do in every other parsha in the Torah. And the truth is, we see that Yaakov recognized that something was happening as he left Eretz Yisrael, which certainly made an impression on him. Torah tells us in Parak Chav Chet, Pasuk Yud Bet, about the ladder that was there and the angels that are going up and down. Malachei Elokim Olim V'Yordim Bo. Rashi says right away, Malachim Shalivuhu Ba'aretz Ein Yotzim L'chutz La'aretz. The angels that were with him in the land of Israel, they're not going to go with him to Chutz La'aretz. It's a different level of angels, a different level of spirituality. And then certainly when he came back, the angels that were with him in Chutz La'aretz left him, and he's greeted again by the angels coming to Eretz Yisrael. So it was implanted inside of Yaakov Avinu that there's a difference that's taking place here. I want to get back to Eretz Yisrael. I want to get back to that place where I had the higher level angels, the more spiritual ones. When I get back to Eretz Yisrael, they'll be there for me. And really amazingly, if you look very carefully at the Psukim, you will see a difference in what Yaakov did when he left Eretz Yisrael and when he came back. When he leaves Eretz Yisrael, Parak Chav Chet, Pasuk Yud Chet, it says he got up, he took a stone, and he made a matzeva, vayitzok shemen al rosha. He put oil on it. Okay. When Yaakov Avinu comes back, Parak Lamed Hey Pasuk Yud Daled, he makes another matzeva to Hashem, and not only vayitzok aleha shemen, but vayasech aleha nesach. He poured wine on it. Why did he pour wine on it when he was coming back to Eretz Yisrael? And he didn't pour wine on it when he came, when he was leaving Eretz Yisrael. Why the difference? Why leaving Eretz Yisrael, no wine, coming back to Eretz Yisrael, there is wine? Says, there's nine in the Torah of Sorotzkin says, because wine is a sign of happiness and joy. While Yaakov Avinu was leaving Eretz Yisrael, he was not happy about the situation. And therefore, he gave thanks to Hashem for his promises that all would be okay. But when he comes back from Chutz La'aretz and goes into Israel, he puts wine on the matzeva. He's rejoicing because he's coming back to Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov Avinu spent a lot of time outside of Israel, and his mind the entire time was focused on getting back to Eretz Yisrael. And we see that in the rejoicing that he felt when he got back to Eretz Yisrael. This certainly reminds us of the famous poem and the words of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Libi b'mizrach va'anochi b'sof ma'arav. I might be in the West. That might be where I am physically, but my heart is in Eretz Yisrael. This is something that really has to be worked on. And there's no doubt that we live in a time where there's a lot of comfort in living outside of Eretz Yisrael. But whether you can make aliyah, you can't make aliyah, your mind should be on Eretz Yisrael as a goal. And we see that Yaakov Avinu did not lose thought of Eretz Yisrael. This is something that we have to think about. You go throughout the ages. It's really an amazing thing to see how the great leaders, they always wanted to get to Eretz Yisrael. I came across, I put it in my book, Coming Home, about living in Eretz Yisrael, a letter from the Chafetz Chaim, where the Chafetz Chaim writes with great pain about what happened to him. He had planned on going to Eretz Yisrael. They were all set, and they were going to the port. They got to the ship, and then his wife fell ill. and they weren't able to. They had to go to get medical treatment, and they weren't able to make it there. But he expresses his pain over the fact that he couldn't get to Eretz Yisrael. We know about the Chavetz Chaim for laws of Lashon Hara. That's obviously important. But let's learn about his passion and his desire for Eretz Yisrael. And let's make sure that even if one is living in Chutz La'aretz, that their heart, their mind, their thoughts are with Eretz Yisrael at all times. And as Yaakov Avinu on getting back to Eretz Yisrael, that was certainly a goal for those of us who live in Eretz Yisrael to appreciate this gift that we have. So it really is a lesson that can be learned from both sides. That's lesson number one, Yaakov Avinu, not losing thought for a moment about Eretz Yisrael, and that's shown by the continuity in this week's Parsha. Moving on, when Hashem speaks to Yaakov Avinu in Perek Chav Chet Pasuk Yudalid, what does he say? V'haya zaracha ka'afar haaretz. He says, your children are going to be like the dust of the earth. We find many different symbolisms for the Jewish people. Earlier on the Torah, Perek Chav Bet Pasuk Yud, what is Avram Avinu told? V'harba abed zaracha k'chochvei hashemayim. You'll be like the stars, the kachol asher al sfat hayam, and the sand that's along the sea. Very interesting. So we have the stars of Shemayim, we have the sand along the sea, and we have the dust of the earth. The Kli Yakar over there in Perek Chaf Bet talks about it, and he says this references three different stages of Jewish history, and Hashem is telling us what's going to happen to the Jewish people. On the one hand, there will be times when we will be Kochvei HaShemayim. We're going to be the stars. We're going to be strong. The world will respect us. Certainly, when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, we were at that climax of our history where we certainly were filling that role. And other times as well where Jews succeeded, Kochvei HaShemayim. That's one part of our destiny. But we're also going to be like the sand along the sea. Says the Kli Yakar, what is that? The waves are attacking dry land, and the sand is there to break it. They're not going to be able to get onto dry land and destroy the dry earth. The sand is there, and that's why it specifically says Chol al Sfat Hayam, and he actually points out that that's the terminology that's used when Yaakov davens to Hashem to save him from Esav. He says, Ata Marta, you said that everything will be good and you'll be like the sand of the sea. Hashem, remember, the sand fights off the enemies. That's going to be another stage of our history where enemies are attacking us, and with Hashem's help, we fight them off. And there's a third stage. And that third stage is when we're afar haaretz. Hashem makes it very clear from the very beginning that there are going to be times when we are going to be the dust of the earth that people tread upon. We will be persecuted, we will be downtrodden, and there will be horrific times in our history. That's a little bit scary that Hashem is saying that is what is going to happen. That's not a nice promise. What's that all about? I understand Kochvei HaShemayim, the stars of the heaven. I understand the sand that stops the waves and the attacks from our enemies. What is this promise that will be like the dust of the earth? Points out the Kli Yakar, there's a second half to this pasuk in our parsha. Again, Perek Chav Chet Pasuk Yudalid. You will be like afar haaretz, but then ufaratzta yaked matzafon v'negba. You will just bust forth and you will explode in the most positive ways and get back to great strength. That is an amazing promise, that even when you have afar haaretz, to know that this greatness will come. And we've seen this in our history. Without getting into any philosophical, theological, ideological questions about the Holocaust, one thing is for sure, after that most horrific time in our history, the Jewish people on a certain level exploded in the most positive way with the advent and the creation of the state of Israel. That's an amazing, amazing thing. And that's something which we see throughout our history. No matter how far down we go, we end up coming back and reaching incredible strength. And that's what Hashem is promising over here. So there's three stages. And in all those stages, Hashem is with us. It's either going to be we're having success without any struggles. We're going to be struggling, but we'll fight off our enemies like the sand, specifically the sand of the sea, which is fighting off those waves. And then we'll also be afar haaretz, but immediately afterwards, the good times will come. And that is lesson number 2, to recognize that Hashem set forth throughout our history that this is the way it's going to be. But even when we're afar haaretz, we have that promise from Hashem that right afterwards, as this week's parsha says, Ufaratzta, Yama, Vakenma, we're going to get all over the place and we'll be strong. And that really brings to mind what it says in the story of our slavery in Egypt, where it says in Shemot, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yudbet, Kasher Yanuoto, the more we were persecuted, Kain, Yerbeh, V'chein Yifrotz, we just grew from that. And that's what we have to be as a nation as well. Even when we're put down and tread upon, we bounce back with Hashem's help, and we can reach the greatest of heights. That's lesson number 2. Lesson number 3. So quite amazingly, Yaakov Avinu goes to this foreign land where he knows nobody. And it's described that all of the shepherds were gathering together. And in Perek Chavtet Pasuk Daled, the shepherds are there by the well. And what does Yaakov Avinu say? Vayomer lahem achai me'ayin batem. My brothers, where did you come from? My brothers? He doesn't even know who they are. He has no idea if they are related to him or not related to him. They're random shepherds. And Yaakov Avinu says, Achai, what is that all about? Says the Netziv, Limei Lashono Ledaber Lashon Ahava V'Reut. Yaakov Avinu taught himself to be a person who spoke to other people with love and with friendship in his outgoing nature. And he sees somebody who he doesn't know. What does he say? He says, Achai, my brothers. And that automatically creates an association, a relationship. It's just plain being nice. That's Yaakov Avinu. Unbelievable. He trained himself to be that way, according to the Netziv. So it just came out naturally. Achai, my brothers. You know, the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Yud Zayin and Aleph tells us, Amar Allah Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What did it say by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Shelo hikdimu Adam Shalom me'olam. No one ever said hello to him first. When he was walking somewhere, he made sure to say hello to other people first. Ba'afilu nachri shabashuk. Even the non-Jewish person in the marketplace, he made sure to be that person. That's this trait of Yaakov Avinu, to be friendly and outgoing, nice and sweet to all people, greet people with a friendly face and with a smile, and say achai, say something to them which is nice, bring them close to you. That's the way we're supposed to be. Not one person said hello to him before he said hello to them. My grandmother, Allah Shalom, told me that her father, I've talked about the Lechem Abirim in a few of the Parsha Shiurs, my great-grandfather's Sefer. He was a Rav in Hungary. He would walk down the street in Kerestir in Hungary, and she said he would pass anybody, Jew or non-Jew, he would tip his cap and his hat, and he would say hello. And that's what we're learning over here from Yaakov Avinu as well. Achai, my brothers, speaking nicely and kindly in a loving way. And that's the way we're supposed to be. Bezrat Hashem, my father's yurtzeit is coming up soon, and we're going to talk about, remember my father, and I haven't spoken about him in the context of these shiurim, but my father was actually this person, and I learned so much from him. Judge Ron Lipman, Zechrono Livracha. I would walk to shul with him on Shabbat morning when I was younger. I was a little bit embarrassed about it because he'd walk by people and give this big hello, good morning. And if a person was washing their car, he would say, it's a beautiful car you got there. I'm telling you, people looked up like, wow, someone noticed my car. Someone was walking a dog. He said, oh, that's a beautiful dog. That's a beaut. And when I was younger, I was really embarrassed. Why is he engaging these people? But this is the way we're supposed to be. And I'll never forget, when we were sitting Shiva for my father, the mailman came into the Shiva crying when he realized that my father passed away. And he told us that every single day when he went on his route, he hoped that my father would be home. My father wasn't home very often. He was at work. But he said when I put the mail through the mail slot, he said Judge Lipman would come and say, hello, how are you doing? Offer me a hot drink on a cold day, a cold drink on a hot day, talk sports with me. He made him feel great. And every day he said he looked forward to that. That's this achai. That's this trait of Yaakov Avinu. And it's one word in the Parsha. Just one word that we don't even take notice of. And then Siv says, we learned this incredible lesson from it. That's lesson number 3. Just be nice to people. Say hello to people. And by the way, even if you live in a place where people don't do it anyway. Hello, good morning, how are you? Good afternoon, good evening. Just talk to people. Acknowledge their presence, acknowledge their existence. It's the way we're supposed to be, and that's the legacy of Yaakov Avinu. Continuing on towards lesson number 4. Perek Chavtet Pasuk Lamed Hey. Yaakov Avinu has met Leah, has met Rachel. They're married. Their children being born to Leah, and the 4th child of Leah is born. Batar od vateled ben batomer. The 4th child is born, and she says, Hapam od et Hashem. Now I'll give thanks to Hashem. Al kain kara shemo Yehuda. That's why she called him Yehuda. Yehuda, which by the way, Yehudim, Jews. We come from the name Yehuda. It was because she was being thankful to Hashem for his birth. Rashi says, what was so thankful about Yehuda more than the other sons that were born? Shenatalti yoter michelki. Leah knew that there were going to be 12 tribes. There are 4 wives. Each one's supposed to have 3. She gets her 4th son. She now has more than her portion. Me'ata yishli lahodos. Now I have to give thanks. The Gemara in Brachos on Daf Zayin Mebet says, from the day that Hashem created the world, there was no one who gave thanks to Hashem ad shabasa Leah v'hodaso, until Leah came along and gave thanks to Hashem. No one gave thanks to Hashem until Leah. We have so many stories in the Torah of people who offered korbanot to Hashem. Adam HaRishon didn't give thanks to Hashem. Noach didn't give thanks to Hashem. Abraham and Sarah didn't give thanks to Hashem. We can go on and on. Leah was the first one. How can that be? So I had a thought that, what did Leah do? Leah didn't just say thank you and offer a korban. She did something really, really tangible with her thanks. Every single time she's going to call Yehuda's name, she's going to think about the thanks that she has to Hashem. That is true thanks. True thanks is not just something which is fleeting and we just say the word so simply, thank you. True thanks is doing something which will last and truly showing your thanks with action. That perhaps could be the meaning of the words in Rashi, when Rashi says, Me'ata yeshli lahodot. Now I have something real, tangible, my son Yehuda, through which I'm giving thanks to Hashem all the time. That could be the meaning of those words in Rashi. And with that, we can answer a question. Every single morning we wake up and we're taught to say, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. I'm giving thanks to you, Hashem, for bringing me back to life. Usually when we say thank you to Hashem, we say modim lecha, modeh lecha, to you. What is modeh ani lefanecha, in front of you? Perhaps the answer is because we're not just waking up in the morning and saying, thanks God, see you later. No, we're saying to God, I'm thankful and I'm going to show you in the way that I act today, lefanecha, the way that I act before you today. That's going to show my thanks. It's not just 2 words at the beginning of my day, but I'm going to show that thanks to you, the way I act in front of you the whole rest of the day. That is a thank you. So we learned from Leah that thanks is not just the words, but we have to show thanks through actions. And let's remember, if we're Yehudim, if we're Jews because of Yehuda, that means that the concept is that we at all times recognize the thanks that we have to Hashem, not just saying it in words, but in the way that we live our lives as well. What we do in our day-to-day lives, the Torah, mitzvot, the avodat Hashem, chesed that we do, etc., that is showing that we recognize the gift that Hashem has given to us. That is our thanks to Hashem, not just in words, but in action. That is lesson number 4. Moving on, things get bad between Yaakov and Lavan. And in Perek, Lamed Aleph, Psukim Aleph and Bet, what does it say? Vayishma adivrei b'nei Lavan. He heard the sons of Lavan speaking that Yaakov has stolen. Things are going to be bad between us. But Lavan also felt it. The next pasuk says, Vayara Yaakov b'nei Lavan. Lavan was upset. Why is Yaakov Avinu hearing the sons of Lavan speak up and not Lavan? Says Rav Hirsch, why does it speak of the sons and then of the father? It is possible that Lavan, former behavior towards his father, was revenged by the way his sons treated him. In Perach of Dalet, Pasuk Gimel, it says, Vaya'an Lavan u'betuel. Lavan spoke before his father, such disrespect. Lavan spoke with disrespect to his father. Guess what? His sons saw the exact same thing. And this is lesson number 5, which is that we have to recognize that the way we act is going to be mimicked, it's going to be mirrored by our children. They see everything about us, and they see how we act in our day-to-day lives, they see how we speak, they see how we interact with each other, with others outside the home. What we do is what our children will likely do. We have the story over here in the negative way, where Yaakov Avinu is having the struggle with Lavan, and his sons jump in front of Lavan and speak about it first. Because even though you're supposed to be respectful to your father and let him go first, that's what they saw Lavan doing. And it just jumps out at us when we see it saying B'nai Lavan, that we have to internalize that lesson. If we talk in negative ways, if we talk Lashon Hara, we talk with Nevel Peh, we waste our time with things, our children are going to see that. and that's the way they're likely to live their lives as well. So let's remember that our actions are not just between us and Hashem, but our actions are being seen by those around us, and especially by those in the family. And that is certainly lesson number 5, this idea of watching how we act, not just because it's the right thing, but because our children, our grandchildren, people around us are watching and they're learning. And they're going to do, very likely, they're going to do exactly the things that we did. And we obviously want them to see the positive and have them turn out acting with respect and kindly and speaking in a positive way, and not, God forbid, the opposite. Lesson number 5. Lesson number 6. Torah tells us in Perek Lamed Aleph, Psukim Gimel through Hey, that Hashem comes to Yaakov and says, Shuv el Eretz Avotecha. It's time to go back to your father's household. Ve'yayimach, and I'll be with you. God has commanded Yaakov Avinu to go back to Eretz Yisrael. What does Yaakov do? Vayishlach Yaakov vayikra l'Rachel Leah sadel tzono. Yaakov calls Leah and Rachel out to talk to them about this idea of going back. But notice, he doesn't say, because God told us we have to go back. He says, Re'ei anochi pnei avichen, I see your father. It's not the way it used to be. I think it's time for us to go. Says the Shla HaKadosh. Re'ei kamahir beYaakov dvarim Rachel v'Leah. See how Yaakov Avinu gave explanations and understandings to Rachel and Leah, that they would understand that this is the right thing to do. God has already commanded him to do so. Just tell Rachel and Leah, God said it's time for us to go. No. Yaakov Avinu had the wisdom to understand that he has to explain it to them. They're being asked to do something really difficult. They're being asked to leave their hometown, their father's household, and with all the negatives of love them, that's still very difficult to do. And Yaakov Avinu realizes that saying God said so is not the best way to do this. Let me bring them along emotionally and intellectually, that they're part of this process. And then they'll buy in and they'll want to do even what Hashem commanded. What a lesson this is for us in life in general, and especially going back to the issue of chinuch and teaching students. It's very easy to say, everyone, you must do A, B, and C because God said so. But that's not a way to get people to buy in. There are explanations. There are reasons. There are ta'amei mitzvot. What are ta'amei mitzvot? Ta'am means reason, and it also means taste. It makes it more enjoyable. It makes it something that people want to do. And just like Yaakov Avinu went out of his way to make sure that he convinced Rachel and Leah that this was something which was good for them, that's the way we're supposed to be in our lives as well. And by the way, not just for others, even for ourselves, to make it more meaningful and make it something which we want to do. And we're doing it because we so desire it and not just because we have to do it. So this is lesson number 6 that we learned from Yaakov Avinu's sensitivity to talk to his wives and bring them along. Let's make sure that when we're sharing Torah and mitzvot with others, and especially with our families, that we do it in a way which makes it something which they love and want to be part of, and not just because God or their parents are commanding them to do so. Lesson number 6 from the Parsha. We move on to lesson number 7, Breshit Lamed Aleph Yud Zayin. It says that Yaakov Avinu got up, Vayisa et Banav ve'et Nashav ala Gmalim. And what did he do? As it was time to travel back, he took Banav, he took his sons, ve'et Nashav, and then he took his wives. Notice that when it talks about Esav later on in Perek Lamed Vav, Pasuk Vav, it says that Esav took et Nashav ve'et Banav. His wives are mentioned first, and then his children. Says the Gur Aryeh, Ki Esav hayulo Nashav. What was the real reason why Esav had his wives? It was to satisfy his own physical desires to have a relationship with the opposite gender. That's why he did it. And that's why he put his wives before his children. His children were just an offshoot of the fact that he got married to satisfy his own pleasures. Aval Yaakov, says the Gur Aryeh, says the Maral, Lo nasa nashav rak b'shvil lahamid toldot bibat shvatim. Why did Yaakov Avinu get married? It wasn't to satisfy the physical drive that Hashem created in a man to be with a woman, but it was because he wanted to create the future generations. He wanted to have children that would carry on the traditions of Abraham and Yitzchak. That's why he did it. And therefore, That's why he put banav kodmim. Of course, his wives are important, and he respects them, and they're a significant part of his lives. But it's banav ve'nashav, because the goal was to be able to create this family. That's why he got married, and not just to satisfy his own physical pleasures. What a beautiful lesson in terms of the way we look at the family structure. And of course, we all have to make sure that we spend proper times with our spouses and that that's an important relationship. But the ultimate goal of getting married in Judaism is to be able to have a family and to carry on the traditions to the next generation. And yes, they are the priority. We actually sacrifice of our own wants and our own time to make sure that our children get what they need. And we have to make sure that that is our focus. It doesn't mean that you can't have time to yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't have time to strengthen the husband and wife relationship. But it also means that priority number one is not satisfying myself, but it's carrying on our traditions to the next generation. And we know that it's such an integral part of Judaism, this idea of chinuch and Masorah and having a family for that purpose. And we see that right here in the contrast between Yaakov and Esav, where Yaakov places Banav first and then Nashav, whereas Esav does the exact opposite and Nashav comes first. And we have to understand that if we do it that way, if it is just about us, the likelihood is that we won't be very successful in transmitting our traditions to the next generation. Whereas if that is our focus, if that's why we're doing it, I happen to believe that that is the greatest sgula, so to speak, to be able to be successful in giving over those traditions, because they are our priority, and that is the most important thing in our lives. Lesson number 7, to recognize that the whole institution of marriage in Judaism, Yaakov Avinu teaches us, is to be able to have those children and continue our glorious tradition going on to the next generation, and not just to satisfy our own selfish desires. Finally, lesson number 8 from this week's Parsha, Breshit Lamed Bet, Pasuk Aleph. What does it say? Vayashkem Lavan baboker. Lavan gets up in the morning. Vayanashek Lavan levotav. He's time to say goodbye. Lavan is going to separate from Yaakov and his camp. He wakes up, he kisses them, and Vayivarech ethem, and he gives them a bracha, and then he goes back to where he came from. He gives them a bracha. Why is the Torah telling us that Lavan, this person who's described as so evil, gave them a bracha? Why is that significant? Let's remember, the Gemara tells us in Masechet Megillah, Daf Yud Zayin Aleph, Amar Belazar, Amar Bechanina, La'olam al tehi brachat hediot kala be'einecha. The bracha of the most simple person, even in this case, someone who's a rasha, should never be a light in your eyes. We accept blessings from all. There is no one who we don't want to have a blessing from. You never know what the impact can be of somebody giving a bracha. Therefore, the Torah goes out of its way to tell us Lavan gave his children a bracha, and it could be that that bracha took hold, and that bracha made a difference and had an impact on these children of his, which are the future of the Jewish people. Be around people who give brachot, accept brachot from all people, and I'll go one step further and give brachot to others. Give brachot to others. We might not view ourselves as tzaddikim. We can see ourselves as being very simple people, and we're very aware of all of our flaws, but be someone who gives brachot to other people. If that is true, that Lavan's bracha takes hold and is significant, then our brachot certainly can have an impact. And that is lesson number 8 from this week's Parsha, to both be willing to accept and even more importantly, to give brachot to other people at all times in all scenarios. Let's go over the various lessons that we learned from this week's Parsha. Lesson number 1, not one break in the whole Parsha. Yaakov Avinu's mind did not leave Eretz Yisrael. You can be out of Eretz Yisrael, but your heart is in Eretz Yisrael, and that's the way it has to be for every Jew, anywhere they are around the world. Lesson number 2, Hashem says that we'll have our great moments as Jews, but we're also going to be fighting off our enemies as the sand. But afar haaretz, when we're down, that's when ufaratza. That's when the promise comes that we're going to come back stronger. To always, first of all, look at history and see that that's happened. And let's remember that whenever we're experiencing those downs, to persevere, because we're going to experience those ups again. Lesson number 3, achai. Yaakov Avinu saying achai. What an amazing one word and an incredible lesson that we learn from it. Let's be people who reach out to other people around us. We say hello, we say good morning, we say how are you, we say achi, we speak lovingly and kindly. Let's be like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. No one ever said hello before him. Let's be like him. Let's be like my great-grandfather. Let's be like my father, Zechron Livracha, as well. Lesson number 4. Hapam ode et Hashem. We are Yehudim. What is Yehudah? The Gemara's explanation that she's the first to give thanks because real thanks is something tangible. Let's tangibly thank God. Modeh ani lefanecha. The way I live my life throughout my day is going to show the thanks that I have to you for keeping me alive and giving me the brachot that I have. And we as Jews to live our lives collectively, showing Hashem our thanks and not just saying the thanks, because that's what a true thank you really is. Lesson number 5. Lavan's sons learned from him. They saw his bad behavior, jumping in and speaking before their father, his father, and they did the exact same. Remember, we're being watched. Remember that we have to go out of our way to set an example for our children, for our grandchildren, for those around us. Lesson number 6. We saw very clearly that Hashem commanded Yaakov to go back to Eretz Yisrael, but he doesn't say to Leah and Rachel, we're commanded to go back. He explains it to them. He wins them over. Ta'amei ha-mitzvot. It's not just Hashem commanded and therefore I'm commanding you, but wherever we have them. Obviously, there are chukim where we don't have them. Where we have them, let's do whatever we can to make it something which they want to be part of. Ta'amuru. That see that it's good to be an Eved Hashem and to live a Torah lifestyle, not just teaching it to them because we're commanded, but make it meaningful, make it tasty, make it something which they want to be part of. Lesson number 7. We had Yaakov Avinu putting Banav before Nashav, Esav doing the opposite. Let's make sure that we realize that the reason why we have the institution of marriage is not just to satisfy our selfish desires, but it's because we want to give over a Masorah to a next generation, a husband and wife together as part of that special relationship as we be those conduits. That has to be priority number 1. And then finally, the last lesson, the Parsha of the Bracha. Lavan gave a Bracha. Let's give Brachot to people around us. Brachot of a hedyot make a difference. Let's accept those brachot, and let's also make sure to give those brachot. Hopefully you can take from one of these 8 lessons, if not all of them, from the Parsha, and as we grow in Avodas Hashem through the Parsha and learn those lessons, wishing every single one of you a Shabbat Shalom.